Okay, so this channel is all about getting out of your comfort zone, and this is probably the best way to do it. Couple things before we dive in. You're probably noticing a few things. One, the quality took a hit since my last video. This is done on my computer with a webcam. The webcam is not the greatest quality. The other video was shot on my phone, which can do like 4K, 60 FPS. This thing can obviously not do that. Eventually, I'd like to upgrade it. I'm not going to be doing. I don't know how many videos I'll be doing like in this setting because this office room that I have isn't, it's kind of like my workspace in a sense. Like if I'm in here doing something, it's usually like work from home or I'm doing YouTube stuff or whatever. So this space doesn't get utilized a whole lot. So a good chunk of my videos may or may not be in here, but if I find that I'm doing them a lot in here, or even if I don't, I think I could certainly use an upgrade. The other thing is like, you see this light, the freaking window. Obviously, I don't have blinds in here, and yeah, it's kind of throwing off the lighting. I should get one of those like they do like the selfies, the circle, like the ring lights. I should hang one of them right here so that the lighting isn't so rough. I look pretty rough. Not that that matters. That's part of the reason that I'm doing this. Get yourself out there. Judgment's gonna come one way or another. But let's get into the topic. So my other video is kind of like an introduction to the channel. Oh, by the way, if you see my cat, he's chilling. He loves sleeping in recliners. He pretty much sleeps all day. Right on. Wish I could do that. So my first video was an introduction to the channel, going over, just kind of like a surface level, touching on many different things. The mental struggles that I've had, the medications that I'm on, a brief overview of like my symptoms, things of that nature. And I was rushed. I was on my lunch break, and I wanted to do a good introduction to kind of give you an overview as to what you can expect here. I got out of work early today. I have a little bit more time to kind of unpack, and I thought, what better way to start than just with like the history, of my issues, mainly focusing on anxiety, because if you watch that other video, you'll know I didn't actually know that I had like ADHD or panic attacks until I got diagnosed a couple months ago. So, with that being said, this is going to be anxiety heavy, but it's kind of unique. I've watched some other videos on this, personal like testimonies or like chronicling of an anxiety history. I don't know. They're not titled that, but it's interesting to see people talk openly about it. And it always seems to start with them being shy as a kid, or them having an upbringing where they were maybe very sheltered and they weren't exposed to a whole lot. Mine's very mine's very contrasting to that. So I was actually very normal, had friends as a kid, went to school. I was kind of I was somewhere in between like a bookworm and a class clown type. Like most of the class got along with me fine. I didn't really have problems with anybody, and I don't believe they had problems with me, at least as far as I could tell. Um, I cracked a lot of jokes, and this was all until age 10. So the first 10 years of my life, there was very little in the way of anxiety that I can recall. Anyway, I'm 29 now. Of course, my memories aren't the most reliable. I don't think anybody's memories are that reliable. But point being, symptoms of anxiety, very low to none. In those early years of my life, like the entire single digits of my childhood, I was just a normal kid. I had a pretty rough upbringing. I grew up very poor, drug abuse, crazy, whacked out stuff going on around the house. But I always perceived it as being normal, so it wasn't weird to me until later. But staying with the topic of anxiety, mental health, things of those flavor. Year 10. was a huge turning point. So this was 2004. Um, I moved. We moved. My family packed up and moved in with my grandparents who lived in another city. And it was like a freaking switch flipped in my head. So when that happened, being pulled from the environment where I knew everybody, everybody was cool with me, I was cool with them, had friends, had really carved out a good group of friends of like 3 or 4 people. One in particular, my best friend as a kid, but had a good solid group of people that I was around. Being pulled out of that environment where I knew everybody, the teachers knew me, the kids knew me, I was growing up with the same group of kids, being thrown into this other environment against my will that was a result of all the trouble at home, with the drug abuse and growing up very poor, was ultimately the cause of it. That just triggered me hardcore, and I withdrew. I kind of went into a shell of myself. I didn't want to be vulnerable. And so, 5th grade onwards, this is age 10 onwards, I'm just not really talking to anybody, finding it hard to make friends. I can't expose myself to anybody. I don't hang out with anybody outside of school, and I start living here, which is, when I say here, online. I start living on the internet. Chat rooms and things. I always had an interest in technology from a very young age. My mom let me get on the computer, and whether it was playing games or just like downloading music or whatever, I always loved technology, and that's something that I'm still pretty interested in today. But that's besides the point. I immersed myself in the online space. So back this was like 2004, 2005, Yahoo Messenger, AOL Messenger, MSN Messenger. Those are the big ones today. If anybody's watching this who's like Gen Z, you may not have been as familiar with the instant messenger programs, because today it's all like Discord and you just text people, and it's all done through these connected platforms. Back then it wasn't so connected. You had different messaging platforms, and I immersed myself in all of it. That became my social interaction. And I was still developing. I mean, anyone who's 10 years old is still developing, but I just shifted everything online. And at school, things were rough. School was the roughest thing for me, because like the days where it was like, okay, everybody find a partner, or the days where it's like you're going to be presenting. Whereas before I would have been, I don't necessarily want to present to the group, but I will. I don't have a problem doing it. Now it's this overwhelming sense of dread. It's this, my God, I don't want to do this. Or in the case of finding a partner, I don't talk to anybody. None of these people, none of these kids I would consider my friends. So having to pair off really just resulted in me watching everybody else pair up, and then me being like the leftover, or getting with somebody who wasn't paired up. And I mean, I'm sure plenty of people can relate to that. But it was very stereotypical. Like, well, I shouldn't say that, but like, getting picked last for school sports, not having any friends, and the partner thing, that was all very stereotypical. Under the surface, I think at this point, had my parents been more in tune with what's going on with me, they probably should have gotten me involved in some sort of therapy or something to help identify what's going on. But I can't fault them entirely, because we just didn't really talk about it. It was easier because when I was living with my grandparents and my parents after we moved, it was in like this rural area, and so to have somebody come out there, or for even my brother who's very social, for him to go to somebody else's house, it was a chore. Someone would have to drive him into town and then schedule a time, pick him up. It's not like we had a neighborhood where you could just go walk up the street and find other kids your age. So I understand why they didn't pick up on it. And because I was so enamored with technology, I'm sure to them it just seemed kind of like a natural progression that I would spend more and more time as I got older with, computers and video games and things like that. So this goes on for a while. School gets progressively harder. School gets very, very difficult, to the point seventh, eighth grade, middle school, just terrible. Like, I'm dreading being there every day. I'm friendly with the other kids, and the rare times where like there's a group project and someone invites me, or uh, there's somebody who is in one of my classes who sits next to me on the bus, and there's a little bit of small talk. That's cool. Like, at this point, I think I was totally starved for social interaction. My social skills were in the toilet. I didn't, everything was a bigger deal than it needed to be. I remember telling my mom to call in and to the school and get, say that I needed to disappear for a class that I needed to present in. So at this point, it's like the situations gradually were giving me more and more anxiety, to the point that it was all about avoidance. It was all about just getting through the day. I hated school, despised it. There are a few things in my life that I can think that I despised more than going to like middle school. Um, it's not to say that I hated everyone and they hated me. I got along fine. This is where my grades really started to tank, though. So I was like a C and D student in everything but like English or language arts or whatever you want to call it. I know they call it different stuff in different parts of the country, different parts of the world. But like reading, I always did really well in, just because it's something that I did in my free time anyway. Uh, but everything else, it was like bare minimum, scrape by, get through the day, and then I can come home. I can breathe. I can unwind. I can get online, talk to the people that I was chatting to, play video games, whatever, watch movies. And high school is where things got really bad. High school was terrible. Um, just oh my god, being every single day. It was like everything in middle school that was bad made 10 times worse in high school. Barely anybody talked to me, and I barely talked to anybody. I remember in my freshman year, I had one friend, if you even want to call him a friend. I don't. I retract that. I wouldn't call him a friend, because we did absolutely nothing outside of school together. We just would like, we would say hi to each other, and we knew each other from middle school. So one acquaintance, much better term. And he's the guy that I would have lunch with every day for the first semester of high school. I had lunch with him if he was there. So at the end of the first semester, and I should say, all the issues with my grades, whatever, tank. Like, I'm getting Fs in high school for a lot of my classes. The anxiety's getting worse, getting progressively worse. At one point, my parents, my mom more so, she does have me go talk to a therapist for one session, which went well. But it was coming more from the side of like, my grades are so bad, she thinks I'm depressed. The therapy session went. I never went back. I don't remember if that was me not wanting to go back, or if my mom or dad didn't pursue it. I don't really remember. Point being, though, grades tanked, social interaction basically null except for one person. Still friendly towards other people. That's the big thing I want to emphasize. I'm not going around like acting like a jerk to everybody or being antisocial. It's just social interaction terrified me. And so if someone would talk to me, someone would initiate conversation with me. Okay, cool. I'll talk back. I'll try to keep the conversation going. But 9 times out of 10, that's just not. It just didn't happen. I stuck to myself, and they stuck to themselves. They had their groups of friends. Okay, cool. And high school was worse for me, I believe, because you had like middle school was 7th and 8th grade for me. I don't know if they still do that now, or where this was in Kansas. I grew up in Kansas. I now live in Pennsylvania, which we'll get to in a minute. This is probably gonna be a longer video, but whatever. This is for. I'm not expecting tons of people or really anybody to watch this, but it's good to get it out there. So high school, I believe, was worse because you had teenagers, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, right? Maybe not so much 13. I think you go into high school when you're 14. So 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. That's a big age gap, especially when you're a teen. You don't have a lot of life experience. Like today, I'm 29. If somebody's 24, okay, we're both in our 20s. We probably share some common ground. We probably have, we're not that far removed from each other in most walks of life. But you get a 14-year-old and an 18-year-old, that just feels like a big gap. You probably don't have a ton in common, and I know I didn't. I didn't have a ton in common with really anybody at high school, but the older kids especially, they just seem so different. They were very different from me. So the guy that I had lunch with, getting back on track, sorry for the tangent, he moves after the first semester. And I remember there was after that semester ended, I was eating lunch by myself, and there was a group of seniors. See, everything comes together. My points aren't totally insane. It's not like I go off on tangents that don't matter. So a group of seniors come and sit with me while I'm eating lunch alone the next semester. And they're asking me, like, why are you sitting alone? Don't you have any friends? Whatever. And I remember being so conflicted about that because on one hand, like, they recognized that I was clearly a loner, clearly having trouble making friends. They went out of their way to sit with me. They went out of their way to try to interact with me, which is awesome. And we had a good lunch. I remember I conversed with them. I went back and forth, but eventually the conversation steered in the direction of them all talking amongst themselves about senior stuff, girlfriends and classes that I didn't know anything about. But I also just was like filled with this self-defeat almost. Like, this is what I've become. The loner who eats lunch alone, the guy who has no friends, the person who other people take pity on to go have lunch with. And I know that's not how it was meant to be portrayed, but I remember feeling that a lot after that happened. And that was the point where I was like, okay, I can't do it anymore. So I eventually transitioned to an online high school. I just told my parents, like, I'm not going back. I can't do it. So again, like, going back to the technology thing, being so enamored with technology. Technology was my safe space. And in that regard, I really do feel like maybe I was born one generation early, because Gen Z kind of has that figured out now, right? They're just now breaking into the workforce when work from home is at its popularity. The online school has like basically become one norm or a norm. When I was in high school, like, online classes were just like 2008, they were just kind of becoming a thing. Like, people were just realizing that they could tap into the internet and do that, at least around where I was. So yeah, I do the online school. I fail miserably at that. That was the agreement that my parents and I made. Okay, you're going to try the online high school. You can make it work. For me, it was a safe space. I can do this online. This is what I want. I don't want to deal with people, don't want friends. In my opinion, don't need friends. I'm going to do this my way. So I tried it, and that failed spectacularly. F's. Turns out when you're a teenager and you don't have discipline, which actually, now that I look back, could be related to my ADHD and my anxiety, but at the time and even now, I do still believe just discipline was a great way to phrase it. Turns out when all your schools they gave me a laptop to attend this online school, I just would do the bare minimum. The bare minimum slipped and slipped and slipped, and eventually it was like, I don't need to do this anymore. I spent because the big thing with online school is you can do it when you want. You don't have to be there for the classes. They're recorded, as long as you're keeping up with the material. Guess what? I didn't keep up with the material. I only lasted like maybe a year at the online high school. That's, I think, where it finally clicked for my parents that something was definitely wrong. So I stopped going to the online high school, effectively, like, dropped out of school. There was, I tried, like, after that, there was like one-on-one education that I tried, which that the person teaching me just stopped showing up, so that felt great. But um, yeah, at this point, I'm like, what, 16 trying that. And so when she stopped showing up, I was like, right on, I'm done. I told my parents, like, look, I just think it's best that we cut the cord on this. So they basically given up. They're like, all right, screw it. We'll let him drop out. So that happens. So I'm like 16, 17 at this point. 17 years old. This is where the story starts to get really interesting. 17 years old, I'm still basically living online. At this point, I only leave the house when I have to. Like, if my mom wants me to go to the store or something. I basically become a recluse. All social interaction is online. I remember specifically my brother, who's a year and a half younger than me, he'd have friends over to the house. At this point, we've moved out of my grandparents' house, I should say. Um, my parents, they finally got their stuff together enough to get out, although they ended up getting divorced. We're not going to get into all that, but important thing, we got our own place. I remember my brother would, after I had dropped out of school and before, but mainly after I dropped out of school, he'd have friends over, and his friends would come in, and my brother and his friends would hang out with me, and that was kind of cool because I got some social interaction in that setting. Um, I think the big thing though was that was it. Like, I wasn't interacting with anyone outside of my family who wasn't a friend of my brother's. So I'm 17 years old. I'm on this anxiety forum online. I've finally realized that's around the age when I finally realized what's wrong with me. Up until this point, again, I had one session with a therapist who was coming at it from like a "Are you depressed? Are you not depressed?" angle. I didn't even know anxiety. I mean, I knew what the feeling of anxiety was, and I thought that mine was exaggerated or up here when most people are here. But social anxiety, I didn't ever really know that that was a thing. Um, so I'm on a support forum. I finally found some people who are like me. Um, this is where I'm going to do some time jumps because there's just not enough interesting stuff to keep going at. But eventually meet my wife there on the forum. Now, we didn't get married or anything like that online before she was my girlfriend. Um, I moved here, which is Pennsylvania. I moved from Kansas to Pennsylvania to be with her as a boyfriend girlfriend. We got married. It all worked out very good. So, happily ever after, sort of. Every issue that I've mentioned, I'm still struggling with. Um, Looking back, that was the biggest turning point though in my life because when I moved here, my family was my safety net. They were like, I didn't have a job. I wasn't going to college. I got my GED, right? But that was more after I already met my girlfriend. So that kind of gave me a kick and a push to start getting my life together. That was the biggest turning point for me because it really forced me to kind of, this is the most cliche thing you'll probably ever hear me say. It forced me to kind of become a man. And I know that's so oversaid, like, you become a man, but I kind of did the whole. So, like, we talked online for a year before I came to visit her. By that point, I was 18. And that same year, I decided that, okay, cool. I told my parents I'm living here. I'm staying. I'm moving, and I'm gonna make this work. And that was before when I said that I struggle to think of anything that gave me as much anxiety as high school. This is the one exception, without a doubt, because I had nobody here. Um, it's different when it's long distance. It's a lot more difficult. I don't recommend it to a lot of people unless you know without a doubt that you can make it work. Because I'm still dealing with a lot of anxiety even about my family because they're 1,900 miles across the country. Um, as you can see, I haven't done terrible for myself. It was the scariest decision I've ever made. If my anxiety, if 10 out of 10 is peak anxiety, then doing that, moving here, cutting off my safety net, and I don't want to say being left to fend for myself because that makes it sound like I was in the streets or something. Her family helped us out a lot. But for me internally, right, that trumps everything else without a doubt. So that was like 20 out of 10, right? Like, I'll never forget the conversation I had with my mom where I dropped the bomb that I am moving here and I'm staying. It was very emotional. It was a tumultuous time for everyone involved, myself included. I'll never forget those feelings of anxiety. It's not like if we broke up, I couldn't go back, but over time, as I kind of built more and more of this life here in Pennsylvania, it's occurred to me that like where I am now, married, have a mortgage, have 5 pets, I've got a job with a fair amount. It's a small team, so I have a fair amount of responsibility. Like, it's no longer just like, okay, if things went south, I can just peace out. Like, no, I've built a life here. I really have. And over time, every step of that process has given me so much anxiety, which I'm going to talk more about here in a second, but this video is getting a little long, so I don't want to take too much time. It all comes back to that one decision to come here and then subsequently to move here permanently. Had that not happened, or had I not met her, I think about that a fair bit. I do. Would I still be living? Because so much has changed. It's been now over 10 years since I moved here. And part of me is like, okay, great. You have tangible evidence of everything that you've worked for, and you're not letting your anxiety control you. You're powering through it, which is the goal, right? You have to. But at the same time, it's also restricting me. Like, there's so much more that I want to do that I feel like I can't with anxiety. And I remember every building block that I'm talking about, every step that I took moving here, me and my girlfriend getting our first apartment, getting my first car. Before I moved here, I never owned my own car. When I didn't get my first car till I was 19. Didn't get my first job till I was 19. So there was a small period where I was living here where I was adjusting for about a year. And I don't want to make it sound like I cut my family off. I go back and visit them once or twice every year. But the big thing is, and then all the job interviews that came with that, graduating from one job to another, gradually getting up to the one that I'm at now, which is the first job that I can say I like. I could spend an hour. That's going to be a separate video as work stuff. Let's just say I started working in 2013. It's 2022 now. I've been working for 9 years. For 8 of those 9 years, it was in a call center environment. As somebody with severe anxiety, one guess as to how that went. I'll do a video on that. I'll tell you guys exactly how it went. Spoiler alert, it was disastrous, but I got sucked in. It was the only thing on my resume, customer service, that I could put down that was a tangible skill, and it paid decently. So that's been a whole whirlwind. And that ultimately leads us to today. I'm not exaggerating. Every single thing I struggled with, I still struggle with today. But I finally, earlier this year, felt like things were bad enough. And also, I simultaneously found enough courage. That looks kind of weird. I should be doing it over here. To seek help. That's the real climax, I guess, of my life so far. because moving here and getting married and all of that stuff forced me to do a bunch of stuff that I may not have even done otherwise, right? Probably wouldn't have done otherwise, if I'm being honest with myself and I'm being honest with you. But the issues were around predating my girlfriend, who's now my wife. The issues were around predating the move. The issues were around prior to all of this. And I mean, it's weird to say because I only just started like treatment for all of this stuff, and it's going to be its own path. It's going to take time. I think I finally found a good regimen of medications, which is great. And my therapy is currently on pause because of billing issues, but I don't know. I don't want to say that like seeking help for mental illness is more impactful than like all of that stuff, like moving here and getting married and all of that. But if everything I had went away tomorrow, those issues would still be there. You know, so in a way, they're very different. They're very different. One is doing everything that I never thought possible and coming out the other side still stable, still mentally sound to a point. Obviously, you know, I'm not perfect upstairs. I'm trying to get better though. And the other is acknowledging that you do need help. So everything prior to this year was brute force. I'll say this. Here's probably the best way. I know I'm struggling like to say this the right way. Here's the best way I think I could phrase it. Moving here brought me out of adolescence, if that makes sense. All right, so it is that stereotypical kind of like becoming a man thing. But actually admitting to somebody other than my wife that I have these issues going on, seeking help, therapy, medication, all of that. It's way too early to tell if it's going to like change my life, but at the same time, it already has changed my life. So that's more of like a climax of my life, the turning point, right? I shouldn't compare them in terms of what's more impactful because they're both hugely significant. They're both two of the best decisions I've ever made. Let's just leave it at that. They're both good things. Comparing them is pointless. I don't know why I spent so much time on that, but I was just trying to frame it. You know, like these two things are the single biggest impactful things that I've ever done and that I may ever do, just without a doubt. I've got a really good psychiatrist that I'm seeing right now for anybody who's interested as to what getting that treatment actually means. And the therapy is great, although I'm seeing why so many Americans hate dealing with insurance companies and incompetent, like company representative. I don't know. I'm not going to get into all that. Let's just say this. So with my psychiatrist, I'm seeing an individual at an individual practice. Everything's great. With my therapy, I was seeing somebody at a, it's like I don't want to call it a clinic, but it's a company who has several therapists. It's not an individual practice. And their billing department is single-handedly responsible for the reason that I ended that relationship with my therapist. And it sucks because I was like 6 or 7 sessions in. We were making good progress. At this point, I don't even know what to do. I should just find another therapist. But I don't want to do that until I get the billing issue sorted out, because if they bill me for all of this, it's going to be like thousands of dollars. And that brings us to today. And kind of the birth of this channel and telling my story to probably nobody, but if anybody's interested, if anybody got something out of this, by all means. It's all about what this is me continuing to push myself, because ever since I started seeking help, I did the psychiatry and the therapy were like back to back. I'm talking within weeks of each other. First I saw the psychiatrist, and then 2 weeks later I was seeing a therapist. And it really has been a turning point in my life. There's not the tangible, substantial things like with when I came here, like, getting married. There's a ring on my finger. The pets that we've adopted together, the house that we've owned now. Um, I don't quite have those tangible things yet for after I got help because it's so recent. Like, I only started seeing these people, in June, late May, early June. So we're only months in versus 10 years. But with any luck, I'm here in another 10 years, 39 years old, recounting a similar story of 29 to 39, saying that, yes, that moment that I chose to start seeking help, that moment that I threw away all my stigmas with medication and realized that fundamentally there's something wrong with me. And even though my parents had severe pill addiction and abuse issues, I'm going to give it a shot because there is something fundamentally wrong with me and I am okay being treated for it. That could be another turning point in my life. That's what I hope. In 10 years from now, if I'm still making videos, I hope I can come to you and say that. I just need to keep pushing myself, and that's the culmination that ends in me right here doing this video. If anybody's stuck in there for the almost 40 minutes that this has been, mad love to you. I'd love to hear from you. Even if you skip to the end, I'd love to hear from you as well. Do you suffer from these issues? Do you have no idea what these issues are and you just randomly stumbled upon this? If you have issues, are you seeking help for it? You always hear that, right? Don't be afraid. The mental health stigma is being lifted, and it is to a point. There is still a lot of ways to go. I don't consider myself politically like active. Like, I try to vote. My wife's more into the politics than I am. I try to stay up to date with whose stance on what is, but a lot of it's like I don't have a huge personal. I care about stuff that affects me, right? So like, foreign policy and whatever, all that's kind of lost on me. I mean, I understand fundamentally what it is. I'm just kind of bored to death by it. But I say that because one of the key issues that I used to see kind of like as a buzzword, mental health awareness. Companies started doing it. Politicians started bringing it up probably about 10 years ago when Obama got in office. Where I guess he'd already been in office for 4 years at that point. But now, that's one of the bigger issues that I look for. And even like this local, we have this election, the midterms coming up in Pennsylvania. I'm looking at candidates. What have they said about mental health? That's something that I personally am far more invested in than something like foreign policy or a big issue, that to somebody else that may not even impact me. I don't want to get into specifics. This is not a politically charged channel, but I just want to say that seeking help has brought in a much bigger light to these issues for me as well. Just realizing the global impact. I mean, it should be global. It should be worldwide, but specifically the country I'm in, USA, and regionally, statewide, Pennsylvania, like, you can best believe when I'm going down the ballot list and I'm looking at everybody's stances, because I research candidates. I don't just blindly vote Democrat, Republican, whatever. I like to look at stances. I like to vote for whoever I think will do the best job and who aligns with my beliefs. I'm looking for mentions of mental health. I'm looking for things of that nature. That's one of my top issues. I really don't want this to go over 40 minutes. So if you stuck in there, I appreciate you. I'd love to hear from you. This is a process with this channel. I also have a gaming channel. I'll throw a link up, or I'll throw a link down there, or maybe do one of them little cards. Thinking about starting a music channel. Think about starting a writing channel as well. Why not? I'm an author. I've published books. We'll get into that later. But I appreciate if you watched. Thank you so much. This is just kind of a verbal chronicling of my history with anxiety, and I'd love to hear from you. I appreciate anybody who watched this. I hope you guys have a great day.